Barbara Ann. How is it even socially acceptable for someone to be an adrenaline junkie? Do tell me, because I'd really like to know. People that like to throw themselves within inches of death's front yard have a serious problem that needs dealing with. And just why did I even agree to come here? Oh, that's right. I drove 2 relatively smooth hours across the highway for her. The beautiful little lady I've been married to for 3 years, who's now dragging me by the hand with the biggest, happiest grin across her face I've ever seen. Come on, Karen. I don't want to be held back in a long time. Well, from the looks of things, I've made my own bed, which is to say, a bed of rusty 10-inch nails, and now I've got to lie in it. At least she's happy. That's why we've been ripping through the entire park all day at the same blistering speed that we're happy ripping toward this stupidly dangerous Hulk-themed roller coaster. So far, I've been able to keep my lunch where it should stay. But up until now, we've been watching inside light shows and eating popcorn and riding more child-appropriate rides. This thing, with its wide green rails spiraling and spinning up into the sky and down so close to the ground, it looks like the poor dead-to-rights bastards already on it at that point could run their fingers along the ground and lose those fingers in the process. This is it, my wife yells, turning to give me a big, strong hug around the top of my back. Barbara, are you sure this thing is safe? Oh, don't be such a fraidy cat, Karen. Live on the edge. It'll be fun, I promise. Even though I know for a concrete fact it won't be fun, I'm a sucker for her anyway, and we get in line behind around 10 eager looking tourists. Barbara's not an unhappy or negative woman by any means, but I'm in love with seeing her this excited and jaunty today. So be it if this thing's going to make me spew and shit jalapeno poppers, which will rain down on the people on the ground. At least Barbara will have a really, really good time. And I don't think I've heard anyone's death cries coming from this thing today. So maybe it's relatively safe. An old guy is letting the tourists on by rows of 4. Unfortunately, that means there's 2 seats left in the last car, perfectly vacant for my wife and I. It almost seems a little too perfect. Alright, you 2 lovebirds, be sure not to stand up or move too far outside of your safety harness, and you should have a good time. The old guy belches, and I can smell bourbon rising toward me from his mouth. Barbara hops in the car next to another nice looking couple, who she immediately says hi to and asks if they're ready for the ride. Meanwhile, I stand and stare down the rails, leading up and up and up for what feels like all the way to the stratosphere. Little nervous there, guy? The old man asks with a chuckle, and more bourbon stench flies up my nostrils. I sigh, shake my head, and get in reluctantly next to my wife. It's gonna be fine, Care Bear. I love you so much for surprising me with this today. She takes my hand in hers and squeezes it. Her dark brown, almost black eyes stare into mine, and I can't help but feel infinite in this moment. But then the car jolts forward, ricketing along the tracks as we slide up them. Here we go. You ready? she asks, still tightly holding my hand. I'm not at all ready, but squeeze her hand and feel the blood rush to my head as we near the top of the arc. We're high up enough to be the birds now, flying carelessly, our feathered wings working against the breeze to take us wherever we feel happy. And then, like a lead balloon, we plummet towards the water, laid out under us in a greenish pool. Thick wetness flew up and hit me about the ears as Barbara Ann laughed and giggled to her heart's content. It's all for her. It doesn't matter if I'm not exactly having the time of my life if she's happy. At what must have been 80 miles an hour, we shoot and twist upside down and all around toward a rocky cave with a low hanging roof. I watch as my wife's harness bolts up, her arms waving about freely. Fear strikes me in terrible chills until I look into her eyes again and see that she is happy. We enter the dark roofed cave in an instant, unsheared into blackness, in deep contrast from the light of the hot sun outside over the water. She stands stiff the whole time and I can't quite see her face, but I can tell she's having the most fun she's had in a long time since I met her. I grab her hand again, but she does not squeeze mine back. Suddenly something solid and heavy plops into my lap. I jump back against the cart, not at all expecting to see my wife's dark brown, almost black eyes stare up at me from her disembodied head, still grinning with excitement. The light outside shines over the blood spilling onto my lap from her neck as I begin to scream, and the couple next to us, also covered in her blood, begins to laugh and splash it at each other, playfully like giddy children in a public pool. I awaken with my hair drenched in cold sweat, trying very hard to catch my breath that seems impossible to get back. Karen, are you alright? Barbara Ann asks me with a raised eyebrow from her side of the bed. I look away from her and see the morning light coming through the bedroom windows in bright pillars. Just a nightmare, honey, that's all, I say warmly and sweep her dark brown bedhead to the side of her face. I'm sorry, she says. Well, I could make you some breakfast if you help me into the bathroom to put on my makeup and brush my teeth. I lift her head up and give her a quick kiss before carrying her through the bathroom door. I inquire silently to myself that it's relatively normal to have nightmares like the one I just had. After all, not everyone is in love with a living, severed head. Silence in the swamp. The swamp is never silent. No matter where you are, you can almost hear it. The far off cacophony of insects, the sludgy lull of slow moving water, or the cries of birds. It's always there, and it's just natural. So when it stops, it's the loudest thing you've ever heard. In a small house overlooking the bog that overtook most of the landscape was a girl, resting her head on a desk, groaning against the screaming of cicadas. She turned to face the screened window and glared out at the natural world before widening her eyes at what she saw. A horse, a wet horse. Why is there a horse here? She asks herself, before standing up to get a closer look. The cicadas have stopped. The world was completely silent, and when her foot hit the creaky floorboard, that she had committed an affront to all that is real. Ignoring the ringing pain in her ears, she stepped out the sliding glass door and walked across the damp grass to see the horse, which should not have been there. Racking her brain for an explanation, she gave up when the horse looked at her. Not the absent, slightly offended gaze that she had associated with horses. No, this felt more focused, like the horse was studying her. She shifted on her feet, more uncomfortable now than overtaken by wonder. She took a step back towards her house, and the horse took a step forward, glancing down for a second. Her blood ran cold when she saw the 3 webbed toes in place of hooves, and all of the warnings came back at once. "Don't go in the bog, children," called old Mrs. Callahan from her porch, as the gaggle of children ran by with model boats before stopping. All of the children on this block had been instructed to listen to the one-armed woman, as doing otherwise wouldn't be polite. "Why, it's perfectly safe." Winnie said it was safe. "Right, Winnie?" The little girl nodded shyly. "My mum says it's fine as long as we don't go too deep." Mrs. Callahan scoffed at that statement as our protagonist looked on in wonder at the old woman. Winnie's mum always knew what was best. "Did I ever tell you about how I lost my arm?" She pointed at her stump. The children shook their heads and came closer to the porch. "Gather round. It's time you learned why to avoid that there swamp." As had happened a few times before, the children sat down in Mrs. Callahan's front garden and listened to the wizened old woman tell stories. "Well, children, when I was your age, there was more swamp than houses in this neighbourhood, and there was a river that ran under the bridge on 3rd Street. All of the things she described had changed since Mrs. Callahan was young. The river had dried up, and humans had pushed the swamp out of the town. When I got to 4th grade, like some of you, some of the children started to go missing. This was when the mayor decided to expand housing into the swamp." "Did they find them?" asked a boy in the crowd, before being shushed by the others. Mrs. Callahan let out a dour laugh, full of pain. "No, child. I don't think they ever did. Officially, they found what they think was the children, but it was never confirmed." She sighed before continuing. "The thing was that whenever a child would disappear, the swamp would go silent, and whenever that would happen, our mothers would call us in and call all of the other mothers to make sure all of us would be accounted for. And always one of my friend's mothers would come on the line crying hysterically, and we would know that they were gone." A chill ran across the crowd of children, looking at their friends, and some held hands, both to grant and receive comfort. "And then one day I was playing in my backyard with my best friend Ella Louise, and our ball rolled towards the swamp. She went to go get it when she stopped and walked back to me without the ball. I was annoyed until she told me that there was a pony in the woods looking at her. She said it had black fur and green hair, and it looked friendly." Mrs. Callahan paused. "I told her there was no way until the pony walked into my yard. Some of the children squealed in delight, but they too were shushed. Ella Louise walked straight up to that pony and petted it before it bent down to her height. Oh, I can still remember the joy in her eyes as she looked at me before climbing onto that damned 3-toed horse and prancing around my yard. I was overjoyed as well. Neither of us had seen a real horse before. And then that pony came over to me and stopped. She looked down at her stump, frowning. I only had time to put my hand on its flank before it took off towards the swamp. My hand was stuck and Eloise was screaming. I was whipped around by trees as we went deeper into the bog than even the contractors. She took another deep breath as the children shivered, terrified. Lucky enough for me, I grabbed a sharp stone while I was being stolen and did the only thing I could think to do. "What's that?" Winnie asked, interested, with a shaky voice. I cut off my own arm. Silence ran over the crowd, complete silence. Even in the swamp, Mrs. Callahan looked up in horror and sent the kids home, counting all of them. 2 of them were missing. The remaining children cried as they walked home, sullenly fearing the death of their friends. When she came back to the present, she was greeted by the musty scent of the horse's breath in her face. It was right in front of her, standing and studying her every move. Overcome with fear and in desperation, she started to cry silently, willing the tears to stop. They wouldn't. The horse bent down in front of her, beckoning her to climb aboard. Instead, she sat down on the damp grass and buried her head in her hands, crying loudly now. She could feel the warm, damp breath on the back of her neck and hair as she sat there, praying to every deity she had ever heard of for something to happen. The sound of hooves on grass left her, and the sounds of the forest returned. She looked up just in time to see her son riding the horse into the swamp, giggling happily. Stopping just by the trees, it turned to face her and blinked once, seeming to laugh in its slowness. She stood up quickly, running after the horse and her child, but was too slow. By the time she had gotten to the tree line, all traces of the horse were gone, and inside the phone rang. In an anguished cry, she sank to her knees and screamed in anger and despair. There's a reason we don't go in the swamp, because silence is deadly. And that's it for tonight, my little hellhounds. Thanks for listening. If you have any scary stories you want narrated on the channel, then submit them to Reddit r/homeofscares and follow me on Twitter @homeofscares. If you like these scary stories, then don't forget to drop a like and subscribe, and click the bell icon so you get notified every time I upload. Now, good night, my little hellhounds.